Welcome to another exciting and elucidating episode of the OmniTalk Ask an Expert series. I'm your host, Mezzenga.
And I'm Chris Walton.
And we are the founders of OmniTalk, the fast-growing retail media outlet that is all about the companies, the people, and the technologies that are coming together to shape the future of retail. Or Chris, as you, more importantly, like to say, the retail news organization that focuses on tomorrow, today. Chris, we like to talk about the technologies that people are focused on, and I cannot think of a technology that people are more focused on right now than generative AI. So we wanted to bring some experts here today to hear what retailers and brands out there have actually been doing with generative AI, things like ChatGPT, in their day-to-day business activities.
Yes, Ann. I mean, this topic is blowing the doors off everyone. I mean, we've got over 1,000 people signed up to watch this panel of experts talk about how retailers should use AI.
Yes. Well, so we brought in some experts, as I mentioned. I would like to welcome back to the show Microsoft's General Manager for Retail and Consumer Goods, David Leibowitz, and our first-time guest, Seb Reeve, the Director of Intelligent Engagement at Nuance, to discuss all of the steps that all of you retailers and brands listening can take right now to successfully integrate generative AI into your business. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Seb, it's your first time. Tell us a little bit here about where you're calling from today and what your excitement level is to talk about generative AI.
Well, given I've just heard there's 1,000 people going to be joining us, I'm pretty excited now. So, hey everyone, I'm Seb Reeve. I'm Strategy and Innovation Lead for a company called Nuance. If you don't know Nuance, we're about 20 years in the customer experience space, bridging the divide between intelligent, solutions and software and customer experience, trying to design solutions that bring down customer effort, make it easy for customers to get stuff from us. And drive outcomes for us as retailers as well. And we're sort of leaders in bringing automated, proactive, and personalized experiences into that customer experience space. And it's all about driving down cost, increasing revenue and better experiences. So that win-win-win really. And why I'm here, I guess we're acquired by Microsoft last year, so that's really exciting news. Judging my excitement, that's pretty exciting.
I thought you said you were required by Microsoft. It's not acquired.
Required.
I was like,
I'm not required.
Seb, tell us more. Are you safe? Can you blink twice if you need help? Yes. Yeah, no,
it's okay. I'm allowed to say that. Let me say acquired by Microsoft. We were bought by Microsoft.
Thank you.
Let's do it that way. We're sort of wrapping all of our solutions into their already incredible suite of solutions in the Microsoft cloud. So that's extremely exciting.
Well, we're really excited to have you, Seb. David, welcome back to the show. I'm really glad that you didn't require Seb to be here, that he's here on his own volition. But tell the listeners a little bit about you and Microsoft's role here when it comes to generative AI.
I told him that he was not required, but we were required. But he's getting the subtle hints there that I'm giving him, and I am to make sure.
Strongly encouraged.
Right.
We can reword.
I work for a little software company called Microsoft, but in a unique role. I come from industry, retail and consumer goods. So we are industry practice in the U.S. Former, in the literal shoes of retail, supporting big data, sales automation, digital transformation for some of the world's largest brands, and then found my way at Microsoft, having these same conversations around challenges and opportunities for retail CG. And we lead first with how do we solve those problems in retail execution, supply chain excellence. How do we use opportunities like blockchain or now generative AI to solve these problems, get closer to consumers, and then bring the technology in after that. So, really great to, thanks for having me again. Really great to have a, new friend and family member in Seb and then whole Nuance family, because it's just, it's fantastic. The solutions that we're bringing to market around AI, ML, NLP, you name the acronym, we're all over it, and our customers are clamoring for it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, man. I think this is your third time on the show, if I'm not mistaken. How you feeling? I mean, you're like 2 shows away from the imaginary OmniTalk jacket, I think.
I know. I was going to say, it feels like, I'm like returning Jeopardy champion. So until somebody knocks me
you're ready. You're prepped and good to go.
Ready to go.
I cannot imagine two better people to have on to have this conversation. So thank you both for joining us. Quick note for the audience before we get started, just a reminder that if you are joining us live on LinkedIn, you can ask all the questions you'd like of David and Seb at any time in the chat window, just to the right of the screen. So go ahead and type your questions in, and Seb and David will be answering questions live as we go along, as well as the rest of the team from Microsoft.
Yeah. All right. So let's go to the OmniTalk veteran here first, David. So my question for you, you just listed like the alphabet soup of acronyms there, which everyone is always wanting to do when this topic comes up, to kind of, show how much they know, or maybe, to disguise how much they possibly don't know, which is also another tactic that people tend to employ when discussing this. But so let's get right to the point here. So generative AI, I'm a retailer. Where the heck should I start my journey?
And that's my phone is ringing off the hook with those types of questions.
I bet.
And I will say, some people have said, "Hey, what's the hype cycle on this? Is this, how's this any different?" The big difference is, my phone was not ringing off the hook from executives and leaders around, well, how do we implement blockchain? Like, what does this mean for my business? And it's to dismiss or disparage great solutions, but everybody's recognizing that this is a great leap forward. And there's a knowledge and maturity spectrum across, how do I spell OpenAI and GPT, to I have that grounding. How will this enable my brand to leapfrog ahead of competition? How can I use that in digital transformation? How can I use that for meaningful reach to consumers? So few things that I start with. One, it's important to note this is nascent. ChatGPT is less than 6 months old. Right? It was just in November.
Good point of perspective.
Microsoft offerings, if you look at some of the consumer-based offerings, like Bing, a couple of months. Nuance is starting to fold in their capabilities in Copilot. I'm sure Seb can speak to. It's new. So the first step I say is get grounded in education. What is it? What is it not? What's the difference between generative AI on a public cloud versus a private cloud? What's the difference between the consumer experience when I go to Bing Chat versus a private experience? Right? Next, start to build a strategy. Start to test the efficiency yourselves. Right? Start with are we going to start with backup house, back office, things that may seem simpler to start with: analysis of call center logs, analysis of documents, generating text and marketing material you've heard a lot about. Real simple horizontal use cases first, before we even get into industry specific like retail, like meeting recaps, assisted responses. What's a meeting recap? We've all been asked, hey, can you join a meeting? But you can't because you have a conflict with the other meeting. Someone says, hey, I'll record the meeting for you. Who wants to sit through another hour of a recorded meeting?
Right.
It's great now that I can do this recap, and AI is going to generate a robust recap for me, and also highlight when my name is spoken and maybe when tasks were assigned to me, and assisting in email communications to my business partners. That's a start. Next, on the third piece, think about the industry use cases. What are the ways I want to dip my toes into things like developing audience segments for marketing campaigns, putting the power and democratizing AI to the marketer so that they're using regular text, like who is the audience I should segment for this campaign, and having that create the SQL code that is necessary to read back that response to me. So that, I'd say, start dipping the toes. It starts first with education, but then as you start to weave into use cases that we'll talk about a little later.
So that's interesting. So what you're saying there, if I play that back for you, and then we'll ask Seb the same question, but what you're saying is really the back office, just to get stuff done quicker, faster, is really the place that most people are starting, and probably the place that you would advocate for most people to start as well.
That's the first piece. Horizontal use cases. We have a host at Microsoft of offerings we're calling Copilot. We call it Copilot, not Autopilot, because the human is still at the heart of it. And this assistance, you've seen assistance in search, assistance in mouse, assistance in Outlook emails, right?
Right.
Maybe a better copywriter, assistance in building product descriptions, in the copy that I'm going to use for my website, assistance in meetings. So all of that becomes a time savings that then unlocks the next step. What am I going to do with that from an industry use case? And I think that's a great stepping stone. Helps to build an education, helps my organization understand and get grounded in what generative AI is, what the power is, how I should govern it before I start thinking about how I might expose this publicly.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about too. Like I'm thinking of analogies in my head too. Like, you know, over the last 5 to 10 years, people asking us all the time, and like, how do I become a more digital retailer? You know, which I always thought was a really funny question. But you know, like some of it is just, you know, if you want to inculcate it in your culture, why don't you just get your documents on the cloud, right? Start sharing your documents. Like that's a good first step, you know, to inculcate that. And then that's kind of the same thing here that we're talking about, but at a much bigger step change degree. All right, Seb. So, you know, same question to you, like and maybe spend a little more time too, talking a little more in detail about what Nuance does in answering this question as well. But, you know, how do you work with retailers to get them started on their generative AI journey?
Yeah, I think David's answer really kind of started to open up the can of worms here, right? In terms of what's got the market excited about this technology. And you know, he talked a lot about very, very a broad set of use cases and how organizations would have to choose, you know, how they're going to use this technology. And that's really different to the way we've been using AI in the past, right? I mean, in the past, AI was this really narrow thing. So, you know, if you wanted an AI that could understand sentiment, whether someone's happy or not with you as a brand, for example, that's all it did. You didn't have to choose what you were going to do with it.
Right.
It did sentiment, right?
That's interesting. Okay.
We're in a really different spot here. The you know, large language models, or foundation models as they're being called now, are extremely broad. They're able to do lots and lots and lots and lots of different things out of the box. And so we're working really differently with these, right? We're not sort of picking from 10 different models to do 10 specific things. We're able to kind of take this one huge model potentially, or there are a family of these things, and then decide, well, do we want it to do sentiment? Do we want it to summarize some content? Do we want it to generate an email? Do we want it to be part of a co-pilot to help, you know, a staffer to interact with a customer, or be able to do something more efficiently, you know, on their computer? And it's all of the above. So we're, you know, in short, we're working quite differently with brands as to how we help. And it's more about figuring out, you know, as David said in his opening, it's about the sort of the business challenges even more than it ever was before. You know, understanding, well, what is it we're really trying to solve for? So we've got this amazing Swiss Army knife type technology here, right, that can do a lot of different things. What should we point it at? Like, what's going to be the most valuable? And I think, you know, that's a very different way around to start thinking. We're definitely not a technology looking for a problem. There's all of the problems are on the table here, right? We've got to sit there and think about what our consumers need, what you know, what our employees need to get out of this, and what our brand needs in terms of, you know, driving growth and moving it forward, or whatever other goals we're looking for. So I think it's really, you know, it's really moved things forward in terms of thinking about the problem first.
Yeah, I'm curious, like when at Nuance, when you're working with retailers, like how do you start that conversation? Because I imagine, you know, it used to be we have 10 things that the technology can do. Here's 10 deliverables that we expect. But like, how are you seeing retailers kind of approach this conversation? Like, is everybody just bringing, like, I'd like to know, you know, XYZ data points here. Can we apply this technology to solve those problems? Or like, how do you kind of create a strategy around it? How have you seen people be successful in that way?
Right. So that's a great question. And I think for us, it's really about the consumer experience, as I said in my opening. So we're not so much working in the back office, right? We're working very much in the front side of the business. So for us, it always starts with data, right? So why are customers calling us? Why are they, you know, chatting with us online? Why are they walking into the store? What data do we have about those conversations? And then let's start with that and figure out how we solve for the problems we can see in that data, right? So we're not sort of coming at it from the back of the business and looking for the sort of downstream problems. We're saying, well, consumers are clearly stuck with there's friction here, right? They're not getting what they need. So start with that data, and then we work back towards the you know, solving the problem with the technology. So that's really stayed the same, I would say. But here we're able to analyze, you know, what consumers are saying, even using these kinds of generative technologies, right? Summarize the 100 calls I had this morning, right? Why did someone use my chatbot this morning? Summarize the 1,000 things my chatbot talked about in the last 4 hours. Right? Generative can do that. and it can give me that summary and help surface maybe the top 10 problems that we're seeing, right? So even for us as someone who provides these solutions, it's actually saving us a huge amount of time and money, because it's able to mine the data just by itself. That's before we've even used it to solve the problem. So it's, you know, amazingly, it's changing our process and our workflow massively already.
You guys both got me thinking about something in the moment, because one thing that always inspires Ann and I to think about too, especially with our retail executive audience in the crowd, is how people do things. So I'm curious, and David, maybe go back to you on this one too, and then Seb weigh in here as well, and maybe just spend a few seconds on this topic. But I'm curious, like, could you paint the picture for us of what the successful executive conversation about this looks like? Like, is there an example that stands out in your mind of like, man, this retail executive really handled this conversation with me the right way. These were the questions he or she was asking. No names or anything like that. But I'm just curious, like, is there something people could learn from you watching or being involved in these conversations that other people could take back as they're starting to have these conversations inside their own organizations?
I think the pattern that I'd see is when there's intellectual curiosity, right? When they're not, the first knee jerk is, you know, what does this mean? What's the difference between the private version of this versus public? What does this mean for me from additional transformation standpoint versus, you know, we're hearing questions around ethics and governance, and how do I, you know, start to define security properly, because I don't want this to evolve into the wild, wild west. So I think if I can say the pattern that I see where they get it is, it's coming, or it's here, it's evolving. It's literally, my talk tracks change on generative AI every week. So they know they have to get ahead of it. And it's not just to experiment. It's not about Frankenstein experiments. It's about making sure that their teams are empowered with the right education, and that they're also taking a thoughtful approach. That thoughtful approach, you know, it runs a spectrum through, can this improve IT operations and help my teams code faster, to can I engage consumers differently, and a lot in between. But really, it's the framework that we define around how we're changing the culture in the organization to embrace AI, and that we're doing it in a thoughtful manner.
So if I say that back, the best of the best retailers are already invested in training this through their organizations, or thinking about the frameworks by which they're going to train the continued evolution of this through their organizations. Is that right?
Yeah, I haven't seen anybody say I'm not interested in learning more. Thankfully, you know. Like, it's wild. Like, literally, phones, our collective phones and teams they're off the hook. Everybody wants to know what they need to know, because they see this as a great enabler, not just in terms of teams efficiency, culture change, but also that upward curve of driving that next level of transformation in the organization and giving them the competitive edge.
Yeah, it's cool. It's kind of inspiring to think about like what could be when you don't know the answer. Like, culturally, that's a very good guidepost to put in front of people, because it gets them all riled to say like, hey, we can figure this out together.
Especially as a leader, to be able to empower your teams to think of use cases, to come to you, to maintain that intellectual curiosity that David's talking about.
Yeah, so you do it smart. You don't overinvest, but you do it smart. It's probably a great leadership tool as well. I never thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, I love, because we have you both here, and I'm sure the audience is curious too. We'd love to hear from you a little bit more about like some successful executions that some of the retailers and brands that you've worked with have applied generative AI to in their businesses. Seb, I'd love to hear if you have a couple of examples you could share with us, just to kind of spark that curiosity that we were just talking about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as David said, though, we're 6 months into this amazing ramp up of this new technology. So when you start to ask sort of questions about success cases, it's kind of early to have, you know, real proof points that have been running long enough to measure them, right? So we're still, I think, as an industry, still in experiment and learn mode, right? Test and learn is what's going on a lot of the time. But AI in general is not new, and I think the other thing I would sort of insert into the conversation here is we're seeing generative not as a replacement of everything that's come before it, right? This is an amazing new set of capabilities, but we already have a huge amount of AI capabilities that are generating real value and real use cases. And a lot of the test and learn is then figuring out where generative, at least in the early stages, can add something, right? And can just sort of push the bar a little higher and create a little bit more value. And in retail, I think examples of retailers that are doing a really great job with AI in general at the moment, two that spring to mind. H&M we're working with, right? Everyone knows who they are. They've been doing chatbot on their website for quite a long period of time, and that sort of started off like most people. Let's stop cart abandonment. Let's make sure people understand terms and conditions. How do I initiate a return? All that kind of stuff, right? A lot of different questions, but they've extended that and started to look at how they can bring the face-to-face kind of retail experience. Like what happens in a store that can't be done so easily in digital. I can't get advice in digital so easily, right? Chatbots are really good at answering questions. They're not so good at telling me, whether that shirt goes with those pants or that kind of thing, right? But they've started to do that, and they've bridged things like image-based AI, so image-based search. So if you saw a pair of shoes at a store down the road, a competitor, and you liked it, you could upload the mobile snap that you took of that in the store and say, hey, H&M, have you got anything like this? And then in a chat kind of conversational experience, have a conversation about that. I really like what you've come up with in the product catalog, but do you have those in red, right? For example. And that's really quite a refined conversational experience to have in digital, right? You would expect to be able to go up to a store clerk and basically have that kind of an interaction, sort of dig into the product catalog. So that's amazing. But think about where generative goes. It starts to double down on the level of personalization you can bring, because still when you design a chatbot today, it's a lot of canned responses, right? Someone's writing all of that stuff. It doesn't know that you bought another item of clothing last week, and maybe the shoes that you're just discussing might not go with those, right? Or might go with those. With generative, we can start to really personalize that conversation down to the next level, because it doesn't have to be canned responses anymore.
Right. The moment.
So it's really taking that next step and saying, right, we're really doing this really great work. It's really adding value, but let's go a step further.
Right.
And I think sort of further forward in the sort of sales side as well. I mean, things like, personal outreach and targeting, working with one of the largest carriers, telecoms carriers in the US, who are, definitely a hardcore retailer in terms of the number of stores and what they're trying to sell. But we're doing proactive targeting with them at scale. So, when you get near the end of your tariff or your phone is getting a little old, that, and you contact them, they're using AI to figure out if they should reach out with a salesperson right now in chat to talk to you, right? To get the right person there. Generative, again, it starts to really amp that up, right? It takes it even further than they are today, by saying to the employee, here's the exact thing you should talk to you about, right? Highly personalized outreach, not that boilerplate stuff that they're scripted in front of today, which we all hate, but really personal experiences. So I think we're doing this great stuff today, and it's just going to, even the iterative next step, just using generative within those existing use cases, just going to push it forward, I think, into this world where we're getting a much more personalized experience, and that's before we get into, the brand new cases, the brand new use cases we haven't even thought of yet, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's really exciting.
Yeah. And I think further feeds that information set that's coming to you as an executive team or as a strategy team that had the 10 use cases that they're trying to, data chart from and figure out where they're going to apply more Gen AI. But then now you're able to take those deeper, richer, more personalized conversations and continue to apply the technology.
Yeah, exactly. So we can not only have the conversations, we can then summarize them and learn from them and improve over time, right? So you get this learning loop going, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing. David, what are some examples of like early launches, we'll say, instead of success stories, but like where have you seen some success with the launches of this tech being applied to retailers you've worked with?
Yeah, so it is early, but we do have a couple that we can draw upon. CarMax is resells used cars in the United States, and at any one time they have about 45,000 cars in inventory. They were an early partner of ours on Azure OpenAI Journey. So actually, even though a lot of this was just released recently, they were on this journey with us about a year ago. Their challenge, think about generative AI's ability to analyze reams of text and make sense of that, and then highlight, summarize, and then generate new text. They had about 100,000 documents based upon real, use cases, real consumer reviews, right? And they would use those aspirationally to create product descriptions. So people trafficking their site can learn more about a vehicle purchase. They estimated, culling 100,000 reviews and electronic documents and converting those to, say, 5,000 would take them 11 years. Now, with the model and work, pretty long time. We could reduce that to a couple of months in training the model.
We even have cars at that point, 11 years.
Well, that's the thing, where they, traditional marketer who's going to write compelling, prose that is something that's going to resonate with us as humans, that is search engine optimized.
Right.
It's going to take a long time. You're right. They're not going to sit the real use case. If I'm using that as a benchmark, are they really going to do that for 11 years? No. But what's the downside? It just wouldn't happen, right? If you look at, so Shopify stated that they've got over like 1 million products, millions of them, with no product description. Why? Because people find it's too challenging to do. They have too many products, and you now have these products with zero product description. What happens when as a shopper, weak product descriptions, blank product descriptions, those products don't get sold.
Nope.
So that's the downfall. And so actually recently Shopify released their own, they call it Magic, enter some keywords, create some descriptive text. We've built that and infused that technology and that capability now into our commerce platforms that can now push those to Shopify. So I think it's a great case of, CarMax leaning in early. It's a real business use case and helping them to, delight consumers and give them, the more descriptive content that they need on a considered purchase. On the flip side, can't name the name, but we recently released a co-pilot for what we call supply chain insights for CPG brands. You think about a CPG, they're manufacturing product, typically overseas. That product is going into crates and cartons. Those cartons are going into containers. Containers are getting loaded onto ships. Those are going onto the water and they're going to ports of destination. They're being received and then they're being sent out to distributors or retailers or grocers in region. Along that way, there can be a lot of uh-oh moments that happen, whether it's climate, whether it's something that's geopolitical, strikes, other. We're now able to do is surface the intelligence of local news events into basically a command console for a supply chain analyst. Say, hey, there's a flood in this area, or there's something that might impact the shipment. And then the next best action. Well, that's great news to know. How does that actually impact my containers that are sitting on these ships?
What do you do with the data?
Right. Now, the next best action of how do I communicate that to my distributors and suppliers that something might be arriving late or arriving early? And how will that, impact my receiving and shipping downstream to my retailers? All of that becoming more a co-pilot experience to empower the supply chain analyst. So those are kind of two real world examples that are showing like the full spectrum of intelligence generating the experience for an analyst as a co-pilot. It's basically supporting that agent and then actually driving to a business outcome.
Right. I love the CarMax example particularly too, because if you think about how digital commerce works, like even the fact if you could take 11 years to do it, it's actually a fool's errand to have a human doing it.
Right.
Because they don't understand how the digital space is changing. They can't keep up with it. They don't know what words to, optimize against in those product descriptions. It's a fool's errand ultimately at the end of the day. So, all right. So let me ask you this now. So, we're OmniTalk. I've got it emblazoned on my sweatshirt today for all of you watching on LinkedIn right now and listening maybe later. So we're all about the omni-channel operations of a retail organization as well. So Seb, my question for you is like, where should retailers and brands start to dig in as they, maybe we get the foundational stuff going, but where should I look to first as I try to improve or use generative AI to improve, I should say, my overall omni-channel operations of how I am as a retailer and engaging with my customers day in and day out?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I talked a bit earlier on about sort of the front end of the business, right? And thinking about whether your chatbot on your website, et cetera, is improved by this. But actually, I think from a co-pilot perspective, and David started to touch on this, you know, it's actually really internally. It's helping your employees to think about the problems they have every day, and that's usually where I think most retailers are starting. Mm-hmm. It's also a good way of auditing, you know, how well these very fresh new solutions are performing, right? Your employees are the best arbiter of whether it's doing a good job before you release it to a customer and have them, you know, this is not the place to test really at the customer front end. So, right. So I think, I think putting it, you know, if we think about the call center, it's a great place to start, right? We have a lot of repeat contact coming in. It's highly measured. So there's a lot of data to sort of back up and understand what's going on there. So digging in there and figuring out, well, what is it everyone's doing every day? Where are the pain points here? Where are we actually inflicting a lot of hardship on our employees in terms of really solving customer problems? They're understanding and getting the knowledge they need at the point of need, right? So it's a tough job sitting in a call center answering calls or handling chats from mad consumers who are not getting what they want, right? There's quite a bit of pressure. It's very time pressured as well. And so where generative, I think, you know, is starting to show real promise real early is just by bringing the knowledge at the right place and time to the right employee to say, hey, this is how you handle this if you haven't handled it before. The other thing that also does is it starts to compress the kind of the delta between the best experience, like your highly tenured employee who's been doing this a long time, has been with you for a while, knows what to do. They know all of your processes. Someone who started 2 weeks ago, they're in a slightly different place. And where generative, I think, really helps is it starts to compress that, right? It can take the knowledge of the best of you and bring it to everyone. So actually everyone feels like they're kind of being informed in real time, and that just takes the stress and the pressure away. And so I think that's usually where, you know, a great place to start and a great place to audit and make sure it's working really well for you. But then that's actually a really good crucible of learning to take out into the front end, right, into the chatbot world. So once you've solved the problem with your employee, maybe that's going to be a good foundation to go solve it straight to the customer as well, so they don't even call you in the first place. So I think that's how we see, you know, this starting to evolve.
That's interesting too, Dave. I'm curious, how do you think about that divide now here as you apply the technology to the human labor force, particularly inside the operation? How do you think about that, or what have you seen people be successful with in you know, trying to figure out that answer?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's about supporting and enabling and amplifying the capabilities of the human. So regardless of the role, and even if it's in a horizontal approach, we're seeing heavy adoption just in IT, DevOps, with developers seeing 50% productivity by increasing their efficiency in code development. And then that permeates throughout the organization. Now, we talked to, you probably heard the mantra, democratizing data. Now it's about really democratizing the intelligence of the entire enterprise, because a marketer can also glean insights from data by using plain English to query, right? They don't have to be a coder. They don't have to write SQL. You can say, of this customer segment, how many of my influencers are in New York City or are likely to buy this particular item, because now I want to target them for some type of campaign or promotion. And being able to do that without requiring PhD, that's empowering. You think about some other areas, like even just document analysis and review, like that happens throughout the organization. And it seems mundane, but to put it in, kind of in scope, nobody on the planet in the history of history has ever said, wow, that was a fast legal review, right? So, being able to take reams of documentation, whether it's legal, whether it's product specification, if you're a regulated industry, be able to highlight and surface dozens, if not hundreds of blind items to say, these are the things that we need to focus on. Isn't that empowering? And so how much, I talk to customers who bring products to market, and depending upon whether you're in a regulated industry or not, concept to on the shelf can be months to years. You could shave 30 to 40% off of that time. What's that value of?
Yeah, I mean, I have to ask you too, David. When we've been talking a lot about the operations part of this, like how this is benefiting the business. But I think what we need to make sure to touch on in this conversation too is that how the consumer is shopping now that this technology is widespread, that people are going themselves online to put stuff in Chat GPT. Like the consumer is very accustomed to this experience in just 6 months. How is that as a channel, maybe, or as a as a shopping channel, how is that changing the way that you both feel like businesses need to approach this? Because it really is like the internet, the dawn of the internet for some people, or the dawn of mobile shopping.
Yeah.
Seb, I'm curious here, like how are you recommending that brands kind of focus on taking this approach towards how they apply this for the consumer facing part of the shopping experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to clarify that we are seeing a platform opportunity here, right?
Yes,
there's certainly a shift in terms of, once people start to use, at scale, and we got to 100 million users, or OpenAI got to 100 million users of ChatGPT particularly quickly, right? So we're talking about scaling fast here. But these are highly personalized assistive experiences, and we're seeing the launch of capabilities like adding plugins. So it's not just a generic model that understands what it was trained on the internet. You as a brand have an opportunity to put your stance and your product and services into that experience as well for all of those users. So that is a real platform opportunity for everyone to get into. And so that's a new way, a new paradigm for people to access products and services rather than the search browse kind of thing we've been doing, right, in terms of in using the internet so far. But you can kind of think of those plugins as a little bit like skills or actions in your home assistant, right? So if you think about your home assistant of choice, where you had to say a specific set of words to make the skill work, right? Hey, whatever assistant, I want to talk to H&M, you had to say the right words. We're operating here at a level, with these kind of foundation models where it's not like that anymore. There's no clunky keywords to get at the brand experience. Right. It understands I'm shopping for shoes. It's going to bring the right plugin in based on the meaning. It really gets to that meaning. So you're not changing user behavior for a start. And that's kind of where those skills and home assistants fell down. It didn't really drive usability. People kind of didn't really remember to say the right words, so they never really used the skill or the plugin, right? And in this case, that barrier is definitely going to be a lot lower. And so in the same way as you use sort of a conversational platform to launch your experience onto your website, you're going to be able to launch your experience into these platforms, right? Into the Chat GPT or into Bing, Bing's conversational search, or 100 other different co-pilots that are going to be out there that people choose to use as their personal co-pilot of choice. So that's affording brands a huge amount of opportunity to put themselves there in a way that actually is not going to be hampered by the adoption challenges that we've seen with these kinds of AI solutions in the past, right? As I said, with skills, etc., where people just didn't choose the right language. This is not about that. This is about understanding what you're really trying to do. The fact that you're living your life and you're saying things that are actually happening and you're expressing problems in your own terms, and it's starting to surface, hey, I've got a plug-in, and as a company you're already chosen to work with that can help you solve that problem, right? So I can book a restaurant, I can get you transport to get there, and I can handle the 5 steps to actually organize it and maybe send out a request to see if everyone's available that night, right? So that's 3 different things happening, daisy chain together, right? So a sort of set of different actions to actually achieve a life goal, which is to have dinner with a bunch of friends next Thursday. Right. So that kind of thing is, I think, where we're headed, and the technology is really lining up behind finally getting to the point where these things become that useful.
Yeah, but so the other thing that's got me thinking about what, Anne's question and how you just talked about that too, is there's a little bit of, because this is such a transformational technology, like Anne mentioned, like it seems like akin to mobile, let's say, we've been hearing that a lot. There's a little bit of the risk of, focusing too much on the use cases we all understand, especially when I think of the retail industry and the application of this to the retail industry. And all of a sudden I'm doing that, and then I miss the completely disruptive application of this that takes me out of business, because a new channel emerges or something like that for how commerce is done. So I think with that as the backdrop here, like, how do you think about that? Like, should retailers have some amount of innovation investment put towards this, R&D investment put towards this versus just the standard, like, hey, do I save money doing my operations better, save my workforce time and give my workforce more time and efficiency? That's one angle. And then the other thing too, I would say with that as the backdrop is, are there things that retailers should not do with this technology either? Should they, how would you answer that? David, let's go to you first.
Let's start with the first, I think where you're headed is, how do retailers and brands think about where is the puck headed versus how do I help direct my consumers that way, or where they're just navigating naturally? And as you say, on your chest, it says Omni, and Anne started to touch on this. I firmly believe this is a new channel. So we've had in store, you've had online. 15 years ago, we went to the native apps. I mean, it was about 15 years ago that the App Store launched with 500 apps. They're now close to 2 million. That's a brand new way of reaching consumers and users and how they expect you engage with them. And, and I think about the past, in-store experience was all about the merchandising, the planogram, the display, because someone's in there with a shopping cart and going down the aisle and looking left and right. And then that changed to a digital platform, and I was swiping left and right and up and down and entering some text, some keywords. But, Seb nails it when he says, it's different. The game is changing with plugins. The game is changing with ChatGPT, because I'm not going to go to a site and say, I'm looking for shoes. I'm going to go in with an intent and say, I need shoes for a wedding that's coming up. Or, and not just creating a shopping list, but, my son's study group is coming over and one is gluten-free and the other one's vegetarian. I have a few items in the house. What can I do from a meal planning and prep perspective? And then the next action is, okay, here's some recipes. And what's the next one after that? The plugin for Instacart or my friendly neighborhood grocer that's going to have that delivered to me the next day. So that's where we're going. I believe everybody is going to have this concept of the concierge, the personal concierge. And it may not be through, a digital interface like the mobile. It's just it could be straight through the headset, right? It's going to be I will be able to speak to it. Hey, hey Jarvis, help me out.
Yeah.
So I think when as a brand, I need to think about what is that experience when people start focusing on intent and outcome rather than keyword and browsing and scrolling. And how can I delight them, get them to that answer faster, and drive that through these partnerships, whether it's add-ins. And I firmly believe you're building that experience within your ecosystem. I don't know that a lot of people are going to go to a ChatGPT. I don't know, my mother-in-law is going to go to ChatGPT to do meal planning. Will she do it from her local grocer app? Absolutely.
Right.
So that's the experience. So think about how people are going to be using it. So I think you said, I think the other part of your question is like, what are the other things to think about? Owning that customer experience. Make sure that you built a brand, you built a trusted relationship with that consumer. Don't outsource it. Own that relationship. Own the customer experience end to end. Continue to surprise and delight, and that's how you're going to foster growth, and you'll be able to follow that puck as it's going.
It's an interesting question. Yeah. Will people go to ChatGPT to do it? Like, 20 years ago, I wouldn't have thought I was going to Google to do anything. And now it's like part of my lexicon. So who the hell knows? That's the important point here. So Seb, let's get us out of here on this. So same question to you, but real quickly, maybe 30 seconds on what would you advise retailers not to do with this technology? What's the mistakes they should avoid?
Oh, you leave me with the somber close, I guess, there, right? So I think it's important, though. I mentioned earlier on, these foundation models are extremely broad, very, very capable, and we're choosing which use cases we want them to do, right? And I think the question I would ask every retailer to really ask themselves is, who gets to decide? There's lots of people pushing for innovation inside your organizations, and everyone wants to try new things. But there are some downsides to these models, right? They're trained with all of the internet, and that can mean, you know, biases and lots of other kind of downsides in terms of content that they can generate, and outcomes that you didn't intend for. And so I would advise any retailer to ensure that there's part of their organization who's actually making decisions about who gets to use them for what. And that's something, you know, we at Microsoft take extremely seriously and are here to help with. You know, we have a responsible AI, you know, business unit within our business who helps us decide how we're using these technologies and how we can do them safely. So we want to avoid that. So get all of the upside, but without any of the downside and the brand risk that goes with that. So I think it's establishing those kinds of checks and balances in your organization and making sure the partners you work with are helping you to do that. Right. So that's the somber side of it. The opportunity is huge, but we need to manage the risks as well.
Yeah. Yeah. We could have a whole nother discussion on the checks and balances side of this and how do you approach that? I mean, that was coming through loud and clear for me this entire conversation. That was what I was thinking about as an executive, you know, like what would I do in that? But maybe we'll have to do that again.
Well, David, Seb, thank you so much for joining us today. If people want to continue to have that checks and balances conversation, they want to inquire more about application of generative AI in their businesses, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you? Seb, we'll start with you.
We're on LinkedIn right now, so LinkedIn's a great way to reach out, right? So just please do DM me on LinkedIn, connect with me there, and I'm happy to talk to anyone about any of this.
Yes.
So,
Sebastian Reeve.
Sebastian Reeve.
Yes, right. Seb Reeve. All right, David, how about you? How can people get in contact with you in Microsoft?
Yeah, Sam, I'm super passionate about this, as you can tell. Usually posting something you know, a couple times a week on LinkedIn, so feel free to follow. I'm always happy to discuss and learn about, you know, what you're doing out there with AI.
Yeah, your posts are really good on this. David's a good follow. He's putting out some really good content on this topic. So, all right, well, that wraps us up, Ann.
Yes.
Thanks to David Leibowitz and Seb Reeve for sitting down with us today. And thank you to all of you for joining us live and posting your questions on LinkedIn. And to everyone watching live or possibly listening later, on behalf of all of us here at OmniTalk, as always, be careful out there.